All at once, I heard the pilot call fighters 12 o'clock high coming in. I had my turret pointed at 12 o'clock high, and before I even got the sight on a fighter, I squeezed the trigger, and I saw an airplane, and I started tracking him and firing him, and this other one flew in to my cone of fire and exploded. Within 30 seconds of then, we called off another group of fighters coming through, and before I could swing my guns around onto it, my turret went dead. And I heard number 3 engine started screaming noise, just a horrible noise coming out of number 3 engine. And I looked out, and all the cowling was solid scarlet red from heat, fire inside. And then it exploded.
In this episode, we'll hear from Lieutenant Colonel James Worth. Worth served as a toggleer in a B-17 bomber during World War II. As a toggleer, he was tasked with arming and dropping bombs, as well as manning a turret on board. In this interview, Worth describes flying missions in a B-17 and relives the time his aircraft was hit, injuring him and destroying one of their engines.
Well, of course, the 8th Air Force first got to England in 1942, very small, flew few missions in France early on in 42. Late 42, they finally went to Germany for a mission. Thought the possibility existed that when the force was finally assembled that they'd be able to bomb Germany in daylight with precision methods, using formations of airplanes, and would be able to fight their way into the target and out of the target because of the armament that was in the airplane. After all, it was very heavily armed with at the least 10 50 caliber machine guns. And they really felt, in order to accomplish the daylight mission that they needed to accomplish, to complement what the British were doing at night, and to prove daylight bombing as a strategy, they felt it was essential to assemble a mighty force, which they finally were able to put together by the 1st of January 1944, when they were the first time able to launch what they called the 1,000 bomber raids over Germany. Deep penetrations into Germany were soon discovered to produce tremendous losses due to the coordinated attacks by German fighters, daylight fighters. Our own P-47s and P-38s, being limited in range, could only spend probably the maximum of 30 minutes over the continent itself, much less over Germany. And in order to attack German targets, they realized that we're going to have to successfully produce in great numbers a fighter aircraft capable of going all the way to the target, particularly when we started penetrating deeply into Germany. The early missions, my squadron particularly, had great success. At one period, they went 6 solid months in 1943 without losing an airplane. The other squadrons in the wing lost airplanes, and we had one squadron, the 367th, which we called Clay Pigeons, which had the reputation of losing airplanes on every mission, no matter what. I ran a statistical analysis of it up through March of 1944. It's the only facts I had available and found that actually the 368th Squadron and the 369th Squadron, of which I was a member, had more losses of personnel than the 367th Squadron had over the period analyzed, with the 423rd Squadron the safest squadron to fly in. There was no general statistical difference in positions of the commissioned members of the crew as to casualties from my analysis. Typically for a new crew, the mission would start at 3 o'clock in the morning, when the charge of quarters would wake up the various crew members and tell them that they were scheduled to fly on the mission. Get up, get dressed. I always shaved the night before, because I found that if I shaved that time of day, by the time I had the oxygen mask on for 8 hours or 9 hours, why, my face was raw from it. But anyway, and we'd go out and get into a truck, and they'd take us to the mess. Breakfast, which normally in those days, in the fall of '43, would consist of Spam, toast, coffee, and sometimes an egg fried. And subsequent to the mission, we always got 2 eggs. So then from the mess, we'd go down to briefing. Now, there'd be a general briefing, which you've seen pictures of, and that's covered exactly. They do just what they do in the movies. And then we'd go to specialized briefings, the bombardiers to a specialized briefing, navigators to a specialized briefing, gunners, radio operators, pilots, and co-pilots all had their specialized briefings. Then we'd draw our personal equipment, our helmets, our flak helmets, our leather helmets, our oxygen masks, our flak suits, and our parachutes, and go to the airplane. The bombardier's job, when he got to the airplane, his first thing he'd do was position his equipment in the bombardier's seat, and then starting at the rear of the aircraft, he'd check all the oxygen connections, all the oxygen bottles, and all of the ammunition cans all the way to the front of the airplane. As he passed through the bomb bay, which was very narrow with bombs on both sides, he'd check the bombs to make sure they were fused, had safety wires and safety clips in the fuses. Then into the nose, where he checked the ammunition. And I had never flew as a lead bombardier, so all I flew as is a toggleier. I checked my position, checked my oxygen, so on and so forth, arrange all my equipment, and then get out of the airplane and wait until the engine start time, at which time, 5 minutes before, we'd climb back into the airplane, start engines. Taxi out in order, and we knew what our order was. Normally, from our hard stand, we waited till the airplane on the right went out from their hard stand, and then we'd go out from ours, and then take off. New crews normally got to fly in the high right position or following the lead aircraft in the squadron, or in the second echelon of the formation, high squadron or low squadron, depending on where their squadron was flying. If one bombardier in the group lead airplane would synchronize on the target. And we would release, when his smokes came out from his airplane, why, we would release our bombs before we saw his bombs leave his bomb bay. The worst thing about flying in the winter over there is you're in complete darkness, until you're almost completely formed up above the clouds. And in England in the wintertime there were always clouds on takeoff. On the 5th of January, I believe, well, it could have been the 7th day, we had an airplane explode on takeoff ahead of us. We cleared the runway and then about a mile out in front, he exploded, hit the ground. And then we flew through that mess of fire and stuff burning on the ground while the airplane just humped the updraft. We formed up first in squadron, and then with the group, of course, we had identification on the airplane. Each airplane had certain markings on it so that you could identify your squadron, could identify the group. We get the group and the wing formed before we cleared out over the English Channel. And we always cleared out over a marker beacon, they called it. And going to Germany, unless we went up to northern Germany, Bremen, Kiel, up in there, we always cleared in over Holland. And almost always the same route into Holland, because we knew where their flak batteries were and we would go between flak batteries. Normally, going into a target, we'd go at 20,000 feet. And the indicated airspeed was 150 miles an hour, which would give you about, at 20,000 feet, in those weather conditions, probably 230 miles an hour true airspeed. We'd go to a pre-IP, an IP and a target, release the bombs, turn back and come home. It was always a great relief to release the bombs for some reason. I guess you figured the job was really done. You'd go in for the United States and come back on your own, for your own gig. The way home was always a long, long trip. It took a long time to get from the target area home. The most frightened I ever was coming out of Ludwigshafen one day. We went down over northern France and coasted out over Normandy, that area. And about halfway across France, out of the corner of my eye, I saw an ME-109 flying formation with us, and it just scared me to death. And I looked out, and it was a Spitfire. But the most frightened, that's the most actual fright that I ever felt. It was exciting and very boring most of the time. There'd be moments of tremendous excitement and noise and unbelievable sounds from flak hitting the airplane, from people screaming over the airplane, calling off fighters, from the machine guns going off, and then the odor of that cordite powder burning. And, so it would get very exciting. We used to say that we'd go into the flak so the German fighters would leave us alone. And we'd do that. I mean, really, the fighters would leave. They wouldn't fly into their own flak. But in those days, early on, because the flak guns were not as accurate, precise, or as massed as they were later on when Germany was shrunken out of France and out of the Eastern Europe, Russia, and so on, while they were really able to concentrate their firepower, and flak became a terrible danger. But to us, flak was an irritant more than a danger. The fighters would decimate formations if they got themselves coordinated properly, because they had the advantage. They knew when they were going to attack. We didn't know when they were going to attack, for what direction they were going to attack. Coming out of the target, going west into the sun, you knew they were going to come out of the sun. Going east, they loved to have tail attacks because the sun was would be behind them then, see. I remember going in the Ruhr, particularly into Ludwigshafen, in those areas. The flak was really bad. That is, there were a lot of smoke in the sky from the flak. But we were hit by pieces of flak, but never damaged the flak. Damaged by fighters.
On January 11th, 1944, James Worth and the crew prepared for a bombing run into Germany. The day started normally, but this mission would eventually take a dire turn and become a dramatic fight for survival.
What happened was the briefing and the specialized briefing were normal. There was no difference. We pre-flighted our airplane, got in and started engines, and we couldn't get an engine started. So we went to the spare, which was ready with the engines running. We just took all of our equipment, threw it out on the ground, jumped out and grabbed it, ran to the next airplane, jumped in, taxied out, and got in formation. We had very little difficulty forming up. It was a nice morning, not very many clouds, and the formation formed beautifully. And we started across the channel and coasted in over Holland at 20,000 feet. We were heading for Halberstadt, was our target. About 30 minutes in to just clearing the Dutch border into Germany, why the gunners in the rear called off fighters attacking from the rear, Me-110s. And they seemed to not press the attacks. They would fire from long range, and I saw 2 or 3 instances by looking out to the right, seeing their 20 millimeters exploding out in front of us. The tail gunner would bounce the airplane. He'd call the pilot. When he saw them fire, he'd say bounce, and the pilot would take the airplane up 40, 50 feet or down 40, 50 feet. And amazingly enough, you could avoid being hit that way unless they pressed the attacks close, came right in closely. We got into the IP, turned IP, headed to the target. Sharkey called off 25 fighters level at 3 o'clock, flying parallel to us, opened the bomb doors, released the weapons, and then we turned off the target. Turned west, still at 20,000 feet. And then I noticed that the lead aircraft in the squadron, his bomb bay doors weren't completely closed. So that our squadron started drifting slowly back from the group. All at once, I heard the pilot call fighters 12 o'clock, high, coming in. I had my turret pointed at 12 o'clock high. Before I even got the sight on a fighter, I squeezed the trigger, and I saw an airplane, and I started tracking him and firing him, and this other one flew in to my cone of fire and exploded. Within 30 seconds of then, we called off another group of fighters coming through, and before I could swing my guns around onto it, my turret went dead. And I heard number 3 engine started screaming noise, just a horrible noise coming out of number 3 engine. And I looked out, and all the cowling was solid scarlet red from heat, fire inside. And then it exploded. And the propeller came off. And just about the time the propeller came off, I felt this impact. And I thought I'd been hit in the stomach. I knew it was hit, but I thought I was hit in the stomach. And then I thought, oh, I'm blind in this eye, because this flap of skin had fallen down over my left eye. And I reached out, grabbed my leg, and put it back in place. It wasn't separated, the bone was broken, so I put it back in place. And then that airplane went into a dive. he dived to put out the fire, which was burning. And when he dove the airplane, why, my leg just got up and flew around in the air. I couldn't control it. And I couldn't understand why I couldn't get back in my seat. But when that shell hit me, it broke the back of my seat right off. You know, one of those spring steel seats. It broke it right off. And I was actually laying against the navigator's table. We're in a dive. 2 ME-110s, there was an FW-190, by the way, that were making these attacks. 2 ME-110s followed us down. We were in a high-speed dive. No communications at all. We had all of the electricity was shot out. He hit the alarm bell, but with no electricity, the alarm bell doesn't sound. So that's why nobody bailed out. We leveled off at 1,500 feet, immediately went into a climb and stalled out again and dove again. He was having a little trouble controlling the airplane because of this excessive amount of damage to it. He had partial control of the elevators. He had no control of the rudder. In fact, he used the elevator trim tab to fly the airplane coming back. We got stabilized at 1,500 feet, and the 2 ME-110s followed us for a while, but they didn't make serious attempts to attack, mostly because we were going home, we were badly damaged, and the waist gunners were still firing whenever they'd come close. And maybe they could be trainees. You never know. In any event, I started hurting. This tooth was loose from a piece of shrapnel that had hit my lip and bent this tooth back, and so I pushed it back into position with my tongue and almost fainted from the pain of it. And that bothered me all the way back. For some reason, that tooth loose. I said, boy, I sure hate to lose a tooth, you know. Sharky, the navigator, got 2 morphine syrettes. They were frozen solid, so I put them in his mouth. Cut some cables to the Bombay door controls and put a tourniquet on my leg. He lifted the flap in my eye, and he said, your eye's still there. And then I could see it. All it had done was just cut the skin here that had fallen down one eye. He put them in his mouth, and then the only place he could inject was in my wrist. The first one wasn't unfrozen when he squeezed it, and it burst and sprayed his face with morphine. So he waited a few minutes and gave me a quarter grain of the other one. And within 10 minutes, why, I was completely out of pain, comfortable. The bleeding had been stopped. They wrapped me in a parachute, dragged me back into the passageway under the pilot and co-pilot by the automatic flight control equipment, tied me to the stanchions in there with the parachute cords, and then everybody else except the pilot and co-pilot went into the radio room. We are about 1,500 feet, and we're flying at about 120 indicated. The only compass still operating in the airplane is the little pilot's manual compass that sits up there and spins like this, you know, every time you turn the airplane a bit. And they navigated and got us home with it. We had a system that when you approach the field, you fire red, the flare, 2 flares, one red and the other one red. That means that the airplane is damaged and you had wounded aboard. An hour and a half after I was wounded, we touched down at Andrews Field. We crash landed successfully. And so they'd send the fire trucks and the ambulances, and when the airplane stopped, they were already squirting us with foam. Everybody piled out, except me. I couldn't get loose. They tied me into the airplane. And the next thing I remember is that I was laying there, and all at once a fireman's axe came through the side of the airplane about 6 inches from my other leg. And so I opened the door, the escape hatch there, and I said, I'm in here, don't do that anymore, and I closed the door again. A few minutes later, the medical officers, 2 of them showed up, and I remember one saying, here he is, and a few minutes later he says, he doesn't have a pulse. And the next thing I knew, I had 2 bottles. And then they got one of those tin things that they put cadavers in and tightened it down around me and said, how are we going to get him out of here? And so, being the smart guy that I was, I said, let's take a machine gun barrel and knock the nose of the airplane out with the barrel. It's all glass, all plexiglass, which they did, carried me right through the nose of the airplane. End of the adventure.
That was Lieutenant Colonel James Worth. James Worth was awarded the Bronze Star and Meritorious Service Medal. He served in the United States Air Force until retiring in 1972, having earned the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. Warriors in Their Own Words is our attempt to present an unvarnished, unsanitized truth of what we have asked of those who defend this nation. Thank you for watching, and by doing so, honoring those who've served. This program was produced by Evergreen Podcasts and Documentary.tv. I'm your host, Ken Harvey. If you've enjoyed this episode, please comment, share, and subscribe below.